who meet for the purpose of networking and sharing information. So it's very important for us to be able to do things like this, where we can share with the public our expertise and hopefully help people to understand themselves better and understand the world a little bit better. So thank you for those who joined us. And we will get into a panel discussion with my colleagues and we'll introduce ourselves, starting with you, Dr. Berlu.
Well, hello, everybody, and so sorry that technology made me late, but like Rich said, I'm very happy to be here. We've enjoyed these sessions. And although parenting is a big focus of our topic tonight in school, we have some other issues that we're going to talk about as well. The last time we had more of a discussion than the first time, and we'd like to have even more of a discussion this time. And so we've kind of organized it that way. And so I'm going to start with a question for you, and I'm hoping that you'll either speak or you'll put something in the chat. So here's my question. We did a study on high-risk kids and alcohol and drug use. First, a program was conducted with them just around, these were high-risk kids living in a high-risk neighborhood, and they were in the 6th grade. And we followed those kids from the 6th grade to the 8th grade. And in fact, we pulled out a group of them who in the 6th grade said they had never used alcohol or drugs. And then when we asked them in the 8th grade if they had ever used alcohol or drugs, 2/3 of them said that now they had tried alcohol and drugs. And so my question to you is, do you have any guesses on what factors differentiated those who were and were not using in the 8th grade? Remember, if we're to believe them, they told the truth in the 8th grade, so we have to assume they told the truth in the 6th grade. If we're to believe them, they were not using in the 6th grade, but 2/3 were using in the 8th grade. So would you either unmute yourself and just tell us what you think made a difference, or you could write it in the chat.
I would say the influence of the environment that they're in.
Very good. Anybody else have another guess? Well, both parents in the home, Jeff says, yeah. LaRonda, I'm going to start with you because that was one of the factors. We called it exposure to negative community activities. Even though they were all living in the same neighborhood, we asked them, how frequently do you observe things like someone drinking on the street, someone getting robbed, using drugs, getting arrested? And they varied in that. And those who saw more of that were more likely to say that they were using in the 8th grade. So that neighborhood influence was exposure to negative neighborhood activities was a big part. The other part, and it's kind of related to what Jeff said, but it was parental monitoring. You know, if you are a parent, your kids say, I don't need this, I don't need that. But parental monitoring, we asked them questions like, is this true for you? My parents want me to tell them where I am if I don't come home right after school. And kids who answer questions like that, saying yes, their parents were really monitoring them, were less likely to be using drugs or alcohol in the 8th grade. And for this question, I'll just end with another group did a similar study, but in the rural South. and they found similar findings when they looked to see which kids these were Black kids, which kids were using drugs and which kids weren't. They called it parental involvement or parental management made a big difference in whether or not the kids were using drugs. But they also found that something else was important, and I bet Jeff is going to talk about this because I've seen a little of his question. They also found that racial socialization for these Black kids was very important, that if their parents spent some time in racial socialization, they were less likely to be using alcohol or drugs in middle school. So I have another question, Richie, that I'll ask later, but I think just in the interest of time, I'll stop with that one and let you move on to someone else.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the next question was for Dr. Jones, who was going to be talking to us about what grade we feel Black students start to differentiate from their peers academically.
Hello, yes, thank you. My name is Lauren Jones. I'm a psychologist, and I'm currently with Hamilton County Developmental Disability Services. And I'm a school psychologist by training as well. And so I appreciated this question. And so I did want to see what folks thought. If you wanted to put it in the chat or just kind of shout out, like Dr. Berlu said, unmute yourself and let me know what grade do you think, if you had to guess, that you would start to see a differentiation from Black student achievement. And we'll narrow it to those that K through 12, which isn't really narrowing, but anybody have any thoughts on that? No guesses?
Sixth grade.
Sixth grade? Sixth grade? That is a good guess. That is close. It's in that that intermediate elementary school time. It's actually in that there's a pivotal year between third grade and fourth grade. It's actually been coined by Dr. Kunjufu as fourth grade failure syndrome. And there's some thoughts about what is happening there, but in general, what we see is that even though there's a lot, I mean, there's a lot of that goes into student achievement and differences, throughout school, but in general, for some of these big kind of markers, we see kids across demographics, across racial demographics, look pretty similar, kindergarten through second grade, third grade, and then between third grade and fourth grade, we see this big precipitous drop, and especially Black boys. And so when we think about why that might be, I think there's a number of factors. I think there's box of kind of what we always see, this big kind of umbrella of inequality of racial kind of related adversity and disparities related to that in terms of where kids are starting and differences and where they come to school in terms of preparation because of the things that are unequal in terms of resources and what expectations people have for kids coming into school. Then there's also there's a number of different things from like the child student perspective and within the context of school. And so we see that there are, in addition to those kind of vulnerabilities in terms of reading and vocabulary for a number of reasons, we also see that there's this big part of the puzzle related to expectations, right? So because kids are seen as, especially Black kids and Black boys are seen as having more learning disabilities, more reading difficulties, less achievement, they are then have expectations of having less achievement, right? And because they have less expectations put on them, they start to internalize and say, well, this this isn't for me. School's not for me. And so, as human beings, we all want to have something that we find positive about our sense of self. We all need to have a sense of, what is positive about me that adds to my to my society and my me as a person. And if I can't get that at school, kids find that elsewhere, and so they de-identify with education. And so then you see this kind of loop of, school's not for me. I don't identify with school. I have less motivation for school, all the way until you see this, high dropout rates. And so the lack of culturally responsive teaching and teachers knowing how to, and I come out of education, and it's not something that's taught. And it hasn't been historically. Hopefully, we're moving in that direction. But teachers aren't really taught how to incorporate different backgrounds and to keep kids engaged intellectually and stimulated from a positive sense of their different cultural background. Until we get there, parents, Dr. Berlu has already mentioned parents expectations and parents involvement. Parents expectations is a huge part of academic achievement and mitigating that achievement gap on the parent side of things until we can get the system where we need it to be for that to support kids. And so one take home that I want people to know today is the key role that parents play in motivating their kids and being engaged with their learning, and being that motivator for, yes, you can achieve, yes, school success can be a part of your identity, and that I have expectations for you educationally, and I'm going to help you get there no matter kind of what looks like. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll just follow up with Dr. Jones is saying that, one thing that I know in working with parents who are trying to incentivize school is that every kid has currency of some kind. And so a lot of times parents react hostily to kids who like video games and things like that. And one of the things that I always find interesting is, the parents will be very upset with their child. Like, he doesn't like to learn, but he knows everything about those video games. But it's like, that's how he actually does like to learn, because he can learn within those systems. And those games are often asking them to do pretty complex things. Mm-hmm. And it's like, how can you incorporate their love for learning this thing and loop it back into how it applies to these other aspects of learning? And sort of what Dr. Jones was saying, often they feel it's very removed, when in reality, you don't have those video games without math. You don't have those video games without science. You don't have them without technology. So teaching them to understand how these things are not as separate as they can often feel, and how they can see themselves within some of these fields and within some of these practices, and sort of working to incorporate those things rather than thinking of them as things that just don't matter, are definitely the key. And that parents can be sort of at the forefront of doing that by understanding what their kid is into and helping them to build some kind of expertise and some kind of skill set around learning. And so next we'll go to Jeff, my colleague Jeff, and he's going to talk a little bit about Afrocentric parenting practices.
Appreciate that, Rich. Greetings, everybody. Jeff Menzies, background is in clinical psychology, also a school psychologist. I worked as a school psychologist in DC public schools as well as Nashville public schools for a stretch. Actually, I worked as a school psychologist as I was working on my doctorate at Howard. So that was like my day job. And I had a very unique experience as a school psychologist, though, because I worked specifically with the disabled population. The school I was stationed at was Sharp Health School. And so the entire student body had some form of disability, either psychological and or physical disability. And so I spent a lot of time, finding adaptive measures, trying to find ways to assess IQ or assess, personality or clinical issues. And so it was very, very, it was a very challenging position and very humbling, at times sitting with students who could not communicate to you in a way that you could receive it, whether or not they even understand where they are, right? And so, it was very, very humbling. And, I grew up in Cincinnati, so I went to Roselawn Condon School, growing up in Cincinnati. So I was, from early on in life, I was already familiar, with the otherly abled population, right? They were my classmates in elementary school. And so to come full circle in one of my first professional gigs as a psychologist, working in that same population, it was really, I could really see what their early life was about. right? And the early life experience was about, which is my segue into the whole concept of African-centered parenting. It's, a lot of times we look at parenting processes as, stepwise, this is what you're doing, then this, and then this, and then this. We're looking for the information, we're looking for the instructions of quote unquote, how to parent. And what I find is a major, major benefit to the African-centered approach to parenting is that it's more of it helps to answer the question of who are you, right? Who are we? And that whole concept, that sense of self, right? That self-concept directly translates into notions such as self-esteem, self-efficacy, which is, how functional and capable you believe that you are. And so and it also helps us to orient time and understand that this is a trajectory that we're on as human beings, and that we began at some point, wherever that point was. It may not even be with your current physical conception, according to some philosophies, but it helps you to understand that, life is like this spiral. It's like a timeline that's spiral. And you go and you go and go, you cross these paths over and over again. And that helped me to understand better how my early raising, attending a convent school in elementary school, prepared me for what I did later in life. And with that level of understanding, what you have is a worldview that incorporates more than just the physical world in front of you, right? And so when we put that, 10 toes on the ground, as far as parenting is concerned, what you have are parents who ascribe to African-centered perspectives of reality and life and parenting, which is included in that. They typically have an expanded concept of reality, right? They have an understanding of human beingness that usually goes beyond what we're taught in the Western sense of the word. Like, it's an error is to be human, right? We taught all these things, and as human beings, we're born sinners. We're taught all of these various things that establishes and maintains the deficit model, right? That much of Western science operates out of, especially the health-based sciences, specifically psychology in this context. And so what I mean by that is we're typically taught to look for what's wrong. We're typically taught to look for what's missing, right? We're typically taught to look at things in a fractional way. And when we approach whole human beings and complete human beings with the perspective that they're injured, broken, fractional, then we're approaching them, with only a piece of what they actually need, because we can't see the rest of them. And so the parenting from an African-centered worldview or perspective allows for us, even if we don't understand, it allows for us to know that there is more to this that may go beyond what I can currently conceive of. And that alone, that level of humility allows for a parent to listen to a child, because oftentimes we, children are what? They're seen, but not heard, right? They even got their own little table at Thanksgiving, right? They sit over there in the corner somewhere, but from the African-centered perspective, we understand like, no, this is a divine being coming back, right? This is somebody who we've been waiting on to contribute to our current family. So they have great importance. They have great purpose. And so again, this is the African-centered perspective of creation and reality and parenting. Now imagine a parent who has that orientation when they find out that we're pregnant, right? And it goes back to what Dr. Berlu pointed out earlier, right? When she talked about the racial socialization process and how parents who racially socialize their children, actually give a buffer to the likelihood of them participating in risky substance abuse and sexual behaviors. And it's because I'm speculating on this part, but it's probably because those parents themselves have undergone some process of reorienting themselves to understand the world differently, specifically from an African-centered perspective, when we're talking about Black racial socialization, right? To whatever degree. And what typically happens there, and Dr. Wells talked about this a lot, she talked about how the lack of Black self-respect is what leaves us vulnerable to all of these insidious attacks by the system of racism and white supremacy. And the system is designed to decrease our self-respect. And so one major benefit of racial socialization is the establishment of self-respect. It gives you an experience of yourself historically, presently, and into the future that is respectable, right? It counteracts the onslaught of shameful experiences and examples of who you are and who you come from. It's part of the insidious reason why in the school systems, and it was talked earlier, we're not taught a lot of this stuff in school. I mean, even in the college level, those of us that teach in the universities, we're not teaching African-centered theory most of the time when we're talking about child and adolescent development. You'll talk about Erickson for sure. You go all 8 of his stages, no question about that. But when we look at the psychological and developmental process from the African-centered perspective, we're able to empower, right? We the school system, this is what I was saying, the school system starts us off at slavery because that's shameful. It gives you shame at your core. And as healthy human beings or humans that are striving to be healthy, one of the things we do is we avoid pain, we avoid punishment, unless somehow the pain and punishment is associated with pleasure, right? But other than that, we try to avoid it at all costs. And so avoiding shameful topics, avoiding shameful concepts, avoiding shameful experiences is actually natural to a healthy or a striving to be healthy human being. And so they insert that shame at the very early stages of our understanding. But if you have an African-centered worldview, you know very well that you didn't begin in slavery. You can go back to ancient history and you can cite references to where we were scholars. You're talking, Dr. Jones, about how, we disidentify with education, and it's because it's painful and it's oftentimes shameful, and that our young brothers are actually targeted, right? And it's not that they can't learn. It's not, they don't have ADHD. It's just that the system that has been established for educating is not normed on Black boys. Right. And so our Black boys is like trying to put a round peg in a square hole. The round peg is not wrong for being round. It's us that are trying to force it into the square hole that are wrong, but they blame the circle. They blame the round peg, which is our boys. And so the African-centered perspective, in closing, it helps to instill that self-esteem, a healthy self-concept, an expanded worldview, an expanded understanding of what reality actually is, which then provides us with so many more resources for addressing any and everything that might show up. And your children are being raised by parents who have a level of self-esteem, have a level of self-respect, which means that they aren't likely to do certain things either. They aren't likely to approach the children in a certain way. And they're also going to respond to any type of issues that show up in the school environment as a self-respecting parent. So I'm coming up in there, and if I got an issue with my son, y'all better come correct, because what I'm coming correct. And that's one of the core foundational differences in that. And last thing, I feel that's part of the reason why they work so hard to make sure that we don't get to that space, because the game changes after that.
Thank you so much, Brother Menzies. Yeah, I agree with so much of what you were saying there, and how when we are aware of our Blackness and able to have pride in it, you see such a different approach to education, to parenting, and the research shows that people who are sort of more culturally healthy in that identity do have better outcomes, and tend to have more loving, more capable relationships with their children, and that often when the children are not able to have a level of self-esteem around that identity is when you start to see a lot of negative outcomes. So a lot of what I often teach parents in my clinical practice is, how do you learn to understand your child and understand the world your child is in and how they navigate that world? And how can you, honestly, a lot of parents, they bring their kids to me and they say, can you just fix them? They just want this sort of, in many ways, like you said, a kind of a fractional approach. It's this kid, they're the problem, and they're in my family system creating problems. But a lot of times I see my role is, I can work with the kid, but honestly, we're working with the parent is where I see my best successes. How do you learn how your kid operates, and how some of that's you, some of that's the other parent, some of that's the family system they've come out of, the environment they've come out of, and that by developing that understanding, and if nothing else, a curiosity about their child, they will develop a better relationship, often see a lot of behaviors that were problematic, and see better solutions to those behaviors, better ways of dealing with those behaviors. Kind of like you said, it might not be ADHD. It might be they're just really curious. Like my own 7-year-old daughter, she's super bright. And so she's a problem in the classroom because she just whips through what they're asking of her. And now she wants to talk to people because she's already figured out what she needs to know, right? Like, and when that behavior is pathologized because she's too talkative, right? A lot of times young Black girls are, considered too aggressive. A behavior that wouldn't be if they were a young white boy, it wouldn't be treated as pathological, because that aggression would be ambition, and so helping a parent to understand these nuances of their particular child often can be helpful to get them to, like I said, have a better relationship, perform better in school, and really sort of feel more connected, as opposed to trying to sort of distance themselves as if that behavior is something to be, pushed out or avoided or ignored. And so that's a lot of what I try to do in my clinical practice, is help parents to better understand the kid they're dealing with, and how they can sort of be better parents through that understanding and curiosity. I'd like to come back around to Dr. Berlu real quick, because I know you want to talk a little bit more about family therapy.
Well, yeah, that's really a good segue, what you and Dr. Jeff said to the whole idea of family therapy. And I'll be brief, but I would like to ask the group again, what is it when you're sometimes when parents take their children in for mental health services, the treatment team says, suggest family therapy. And then the parents respond, as Dr. Hall was saying, it's the kid who has the problems, not me. Why do I need to be in therapy? Why might the therapist think family therapy is warranted? So along with what Dr. Jeff and Dr. Ritchie said, do you have any ideas of your own of why might family therapy be warranted?
Okay. Yeah, I hope nobody's hurt.
First is showing up as A. Would you please mute yourself? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't look like we're going to get too much from I can't see the chat, but I'll just give an example. I know a couple live in another state, or else I wouldn't even mention it. They live in another state. They're both professionals. They had a messy, ugly divorce. And as a result, I believe their kids, suffered from that divorce. And so their kids were little when they had the divorce, but now as the kids have grown up, the kids have had tremendous problems. And in my mind, then it's what was going on with the parents that showed up in the kids' problems. And that's what family therapy sometimes is all about, that the kids' behaviors can be a reflection of dynamics in the home. And Dr. Ritchie and I participated in this study on brief strategic family therapy. And there were, part of it was diagnosing the family to see what was going on that might be an issue. And actually, Jarita was part of that too. And there were times when maybe someone outside of the family system was too involved. That could have been a cause of the problem. There were times when maybe a parent and a kid were in a coalition together and the other parent was on the
Dr. Berlu, I think we lost you.
Oh no, I think we lost Dr. Berlu.
those things can end
And she's
up
back.
in child's behavior. And so in the study that we were doing back when Jarita and Dr. Rich were involved, these were all kids who were, did you lose me, Rich?
We did. We lost you for a little bit. But you're back.
Okay. I'll just say that these were all kids that were using marijuana, caught using marijuana, and there were family issues that were part of it. So that's what I wanted to share.
Yes, I remember that study because I was the guy who would go and test them on a monthly basis. And I was not allowed to know which families were in the family therapy or in individual therapy. And I remember having my, I'd be guessing in my head, like, I don't know, this family seems like they're not that close knit. So if they were in family therapy, it might not be working.
We didn't send you to collect the urines though, did we?
I was the urine collector. I was a urine wrangler. That's how I paid for getting into graduate school, was being your urine wrangler for a year. Yes, no, I was in very strange bathrooms doing marijuana tests for a summer.
Right.
but no, I do agree. And one of the things that I was going to go back to was this idea that often family involvement is very key in getting kids to behave. And sometimes when you have certain kids who are difficult or who can maybe challenge you a lot, those relationships can become very contentious, particularly when we're talking around them using substances. And one of the things that I often find is helping parents to develop some kind of positive connection with that child, be it introducing something, some activity the two can do together, introducing some sort of relational bond that can help outside of dealing with this sort of problematic behavior, because often when you do bring in things like drugs or acting out, that becomes the core of the relationship, and it makes it very difficult for them to talk about anything but that, and then that otherwise injures the relationship with the child. So I'm often sort of encouraging parents, it's like, take some time to sit down with just this kid and be able to give them some positive regard, because that's where you're going to see the real growth. But if you're constantly trying to essentially harangue them or pathologize them for this acting out, it's going to be hard for you to get along with them. You're going to find yourself resenting them to some degree, and that you have to really sort of, and that may take effort. That might mean you're working outside of what your comfort zone is. How do you as a parent handle conflict? How do you as a parent deal with someone who's difficult in your life? And now you have a child in your life that's difficult. It involves a lot of self-examination, and often I'm encouraging parents to seek their own therapy. But one of the reasons we know the family therapy works is because the system itself often has to be changed based on what this kid is doing, what's going on with the child. It's not just the child. The child didn't spring up out of nowhere. They are often learning behaviors, reacting to a system that is affecting them. And so thank you, Dr. Berlu, for sharing that. That's the great research we did not too long ago. What feels like it was just yesterday, but I think at this point, it's like been over a decade, right?
Been a while.
Yeah. I wanted to look back around to Dr. Jones, because I know one of the elephants in the room of this conversation around parenting is spanking. And I guess for those of you who are in the chat, how many people are pro physical discipline, and how many people might have understood that maybe you shouldn't physically discipline your child? Or do most parents think, most people who might be parents or not parents in the chat, can you tell us if you're for physical discipline or spanking?
Thanks, Rich. We'll give people a second, see if they want to throw something in the chat about that. And if not, that's okay too. I will just go forward with what
Sure.
with that thought. Yeah, I would imagine that just to say,
We got a couple. We got not for and finding alternatives before getting physical.
All right. Okay. Not for
And one before that.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Thank you, Avion and Candace.
So you guys know where we're going with this one. But I wanted to start out quickly and say that to the point about spanking, I would say probably, there's a large majority of especially Black parents who have traditional thoughts about spanking and feel like spanking is something that is an important part of their parenting technique in terms of discipline. And that is an understandable stance. There are reasons why Black families either have used it in the past or feel like it is a need. I mean, you can go all the way back to slavery, where you have slave masters using physical aggression to keep people compliant, and for the slaves who lived under that to have to they had to adopt some of those physical aggressive approaches in order to keep their kids safe, to keep their kids alive, to keep their kids, with them, because if they stepped out of line, then that was a safety issue, right? Fast forward to today, Black parents have, in addition to all the things that parents have to worry about and think about when they're trying to develop their kids into being able to function effectively in society. Black parents have to worry about, these additional levels of safety and fears about, keeping their kids, off of the streets and out of prisons and out of the police officers, sight. And so swift, effective, in the moment approaches like spanking are a go-to. So like I said, it's understandable. What we're finding, though, research is showing us that is that even as far back as or as recent as 5-10 years ago, American Academy of Pediatrics would say, spanking's not the best, probably, but okay if it's okay if you use it, that's your style. Now, most recently, their statement is the research shows that it's pretty conclusive that there are definite detriments to a child's development related to spanking that we kind of can't ignore anymore, right? That there are short term, yes, it is effective. Long term, even though it's not abuse, it's not the same thing as abuse, but there are long term impacts of spanking. There are increased externalizing behaviors or aggression, and like I said, too much of anything is too much. Exactly, and there are so many alternatives. Exactly, there are things that we know that work that do not have long-term consequences, whereas spanking is known to increase the likelihood of a child using aggression and increase the likelihood that because they now have more aggression and more externalizing behaviors, that they now are going to be even more severely punished because they have these additional externalizing behaviors, right? So there's this cycle that we don't need to perpetuate, and so we can no longer, as professionals, say, go ahead and spank, because we know that there are other ways to meet a child's needs in terms of discipline and shaping behavior. And they're all, any number of things. And if anyone, wants to go more in depth, but, there's timeout, there's, losing privileges, there's, teaching new skills, there's logical consequences, natural consequences, praise for desired behavior, rewards for behavior. And so a lot of parents, will say, I'll get a pushback on like token economies or reinforcement or reward systems because parents feel like they're bribing kids. And I always like to say that there's a difference between a reward system and bribery, because if you're providing a reward after a child is already engaged in an undesired behavior in order to get them to do something, then that's bribery. If you provide a contingency of, if you do this, you get this, and if you do this, you don't get this, then you're setting up a way to learn how to regulate yourself, how to get your needs met adaptively, all of these really good things that you need to learn and to know how to do to be successful in school and be successful in a job and maintain friendships. And so those are again really good ways, good alternatives that are that have a lot of benefit to them that again don't have those long-term benefits. Let's see what there's some comments here. Spanking today was inappropriate for yesterday and vice versa. And an early finisher, though, was ridiculed for teachers bent on their purpose.
You're muted, Lauren.
Yeah, I think, Lauren, you're muted.
Sorry, Letty, would you be willing to tell us a little bit more about what you were saying in the chat?
Well, sure. I think that spanking is appropriate in context. Spanking is appropriate. It can be used in order to what is that called? It can be used in training a child, but a lot of times we go off on kids and we spank kids and we jerk them around and stuff. Yeah. And the kids they have no words for it. Why'd you yank me? Why are you hollering? You don't need to hit me for that. It's parenting. Parents are going through a lot that they're unable to speak about in the bedroom. So, targeting parents and parenting is appropriate, I think, because the better parents, the more we know about ourselves, the less problem that will be to others, is pretty much all that I can say. And yeah, you know, I'm an early finisher, you know, and I was
Lady, you muted.
literally ridiculed in the classroom by a teacher who's telling me that she's a teacher. I know that she's a teacher, you know. Here's your paddle. Here's my behind. Get to going. When you're done, let me know. You know, it's like bad, man.
Right.
And I was labeled as bad because I'm the one that's taking the punishment. And then that was back in 1968 and that. Zoom forward out here in the suburbs, my niece had to deal with the same thing. You know, and I said, you know, what's up?
Yeah, see these same patterns. Yeah, it's and it can be disheartening to see those same patterns, you know, kind of keep repeating. So it's good to acknowledge it and name it, so that we can, you know, actively, you know, kind of fight against it, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And present, you know. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'd like
Well,
to
you know,
piggyback
like if anybody has
on one of Lady's
committed,
points.
Yeah, please.
Especially that point about the parents, you know, not knowing where to turn. A lot of times parents taking out their own frustrations on a safe target, which is the kid.
Yes.
A lot of parents are scapegoating, you know, their anger and frustration towards another adult or even another system or another experience onto what's considered a safe target. And a lot of abusers do that, you know, whether you're talking about intimate partner violence or, you know, abuse of a child by a parent or an adult. And it's that, you know, we as adults often don't get a chance to pause and take care of ourselves, especially when life is constantly coming at us, constantly coming. You go on to work every day, you come home, you got to cook, you got to do all the house stuff. You know, we don't oftentimes find that space, nor do we know to even prioritize, you know, our self-healing and our self-rejuvenation practices. And then it gives us a short fuse. And then that short fuse, in addition to just paying forward what I call the transgenerational curses of those cycles of being abused, as you're going back to that plantation that you spoke about, Dr. Jones, to Dr. Joy DeGruy, you know, she talked about very much in her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And then one other thing I want to point out on this topic, one of my colleagues at Morgan, Dr. Stacy Patton, she wrote this book called Spirit of Kids. We work together in the Institute of Urban Research at Morgan. And, you know, she deals with it in depth about how, you know, any level of whooping, you know, any level of physical assault, because that's what it literally is. It's a physical assault on the child. If you did that to another adult, you know, you might get beat up or go to jail. You know, if you walked up on an adult and started whooping them with a belt, your hand, a shoe, a switch, whatever it is, it would be classified as assault. And in my social psychology course with my students we're talking about aggression. They're doing their end of the semester presentations. And 4 out of the 5 groups chose aggression to present on. And there's this myth about, you know, it's a myth about the differences in aggression between the sexes, you know, male and female. And, you know, the myth is that males are more prone to physical aggression than females. Right. And I say it's a myth, you know, and it's one, because it's underreported usually, you know, when males are experiencing physical aggression from a female, it's underreported severely. And not only that, but even the students in my class, they would just regurgitate that myth without even thinking. So I backed everybody off and said, okay, if we counted the number of children that are physically assaulted by a female parent, then it becomes very clear that the females have the same propensity to physical aggression than males do. So anyway, but what Dr. Patton talks about in her text is how, you know, not only that, she has another book coming out called Strong Up, and she's working on this project right now where she's looking at the physiological and anatomical responses to a child receiving corporal punishment. Literally where you hit the child has a different physiological response in the body. And so she's doing, you know, looking at the nerve patterns, you know, of the nerves running from the butt, you know, up to the brain and how that fires off and all of these different things. And so it's very much understood on a neurological level, neurophysiological level, that any level of physical assault to a child is damaging to that child. Right. And so I think that, you know, we can't, I advise that we don't wait for science to catch up and tell us that, okay, now it's okay, then now it's not okay, you know, that because they do that. they slow walk stuff. And you got to
Yeah.
remember that the APA just issued that apology, you know, for their role in racism and promoting white supremacy, you know, and they're the same ones that they're the same ones who, you know, who were instigating this stuff early on. And so they have plantation ancestry as well, but their ancestors was on the aggressive assaulting side while we were on the receiving of that aggression. And so part of them have to justify it still and have to slow walk it, because if they start pointing out with in no uncertain terms that this is actual physical assault and it injures, you know, then they have to go back and reckon with, you know, their generations worth of physically assaulting, you know, vulnerable populations.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, and I want to bring up something else that you just said there, Jeff. A lot of times when I'm teaching parents how to deal with their children, it's reminding them that they are the first person to teach their child how to deal with their emotions. So when you're acting out of anger to discipline your child in any way, you're teaching them. Like if you're yelling at children, you're teaching them to yell. If you're swinging at them, you're teaching them to hit, to solve their problems. And so if you can learn to check yourself, to take a step back and figure out what's really at stake here, what's really going on, what does this kid need, why are they acting out in this particular way? Not every situation, you don't always have the time or the energy to do that, but in the moments where you can really sort of step back. A kid's about to run in traffic, you don't have time to like stop and ask what's going on here. But like some of those situations that might be happening at home where, you know, you come home from a long day, your kid's talking your ear off nonstop, and now they do something to sort of get your attention that might be a negative acting out kind of behavior. In those moments, how can you sort of be prepared to sort of check your emotions and to sort of teach your kid that even if you're upset, you don't have to act out in certain ways.
Mhm.
And so I'm often trying to teach parents better ways to engage with their children so that they're not acting, and teaching their kids by virtue of their behaviors how to act as well. And that's something that I think, once again, if you develop this curiosity about your kid, you're more often able to sort of see through the behaviors and see what their needs are, and sort of get to know them. And a lot of times with my own kids, you know, I was a very sort of introverted, quiet, kind of sneaky kid, and my oldest is very much that. And so when he's sneaking something, I'm like, oh, you know, that's the type of stuff I would do. You know, he stays up past his bedtime. That's totally stuff I would do. So I can't come at him angry every time because I get why he's like that. I just got to be like, hey, buddy, no, I mean it. You got to go to sleep. And I got to set those boundaries with him. But at the same time, if I were just get mad at him because I don't like him being up, it's inconveniencing me to have to wake up and deal with you, then I'm teaching him not a bad way to deal with his sense of self. I have to learn to love this aspect of me and teach him he shouldn't hate this aspect of him. There's nothing wrong with it, but he does have to learn discipline.
Get it honest.
Right. Absolutely.
As many of our kids do. You know, that's one of the things, man, that our children oftentimes reflect us to us.
Yep.
And sometimes they reflect those parts of us that we're still having to deal with within ourselves. We try to avoid dealing with. And we may try to avoid dealing with it because of how our parents dealt with us, that part of us. Yeah. Right? And, you know, so we talk about that whole generational curses piece, right? And, you know, if I can't just insert the African-centered perspective on this very topic, you know, we talk about those generational curses. And to me, that everybody that's alive right now, we have the right, the responsibility, the privilege, you know, to do that for our lineage. And then part of it is being able to correct parenting styles that we inherited from our own parents, and realizing that, you know, they were learning how to parent and we were their practice, we were their crash test dummies, you know? And so whatever level they were at, Dr. Welson always said that, she said that no children before the age of 30 for women and 35 for men. And she said no more than 2, no closer than 3 years apart. Right. She talked about because a very important developmental, the first 3 years, the child needs as much lap time as possible. And she said, because it's wartime. She said, this is a war situation. And so you want each parent to be able to carry one child. If you ever have to run off, you got 4 or 5 children, you're going to be in trouble trying to carry everybody to run and get out the way. You know, she was very logically oriented.
Yeah.
But anyway, so when we inherit these parenting styles from our parents, you know, we don't know what else to do except what was done. And that the African-centered perspective, again, it provides other resources to us. And one of those resources that I constantly thought about as you were speaking, Dr. Jones, is, you know, is our spirituality. You know, and I'm not talking about religiosity as it's presented on some of these psychological scales, but I'm talking about true spiritual science, you know, to where we can utilize these techniques and these processes for self-improvement as adults. And that's what Wells said. She said, until you're 30 and 35, I said, what should we do? Constantly develop yourself, work on enhancing yourself, work on improving yourself. Because one other thing that she points out is that, you know, she was a psychiatrist, a medical doctor. She pointed out how at the moment of conception, whatever your emotional maturity was at that moment is where you're locked in, because now your resources have to shift from your own development to the development of another human being.
Mhm.
And so many of us, if we're having children young, and we're having children under non-planned situations, we're locked in at a certain level of emotional maturity that does not necessarily lend itself to the healthy development of another generation. And so we're raising children as children, even though we might be of adult age. And so, one of the main resources that we get, as I stated, was a spiritual system that allows for us to go in and correct certain things, whether it be through prayer, meditation, visualization, the other aspects and proponents of meditation. And also that what, a lot of, Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, they were both like, I got that from Dr. Laila Africa. They both heavily studied African societies and African cultures. And if you look at what they're both majorly known for, is that psychoanalysis, the dealing with the unconscious mind and actually traveling back in time to an earlier version of yourself to correct certain things, to unearth certain things, to bring them to the surface so that you can sort it out. That is true African spirituality that they both learned, but could only transmit in a fragmented way because of their orientations, right? But that's one of our resources, is to be able to go back and correct certain things that have happened to us, to be able to detach emotionally, look at it, deal with it, and proceed forward from there. And again, those resources have been taken from us and kept from us, because that is what will, again, establish a sense of self-respect, self-esteem, self-efficacy, and a healthy self-concept. And so, I think that it's very much important that, that worldview for those of us that come from, African ancestry is very, very important, and it's tantamount to our healing, because it provides those resources that we desperately need, especially when it comes to raising our next generations. A lot of times we don't even know who they are, but you go somewhere like Ghana and you look at when a child is born in Ghana, they understand that child is coming back here, and they will often name that child after they return an ancestor who they identify them to be. So if they were their uncle, their uncle Kofi, if they said this is Uncle Kofi who has come back, they would literally carry, and Kofi's one of the days of the week names, so it wouldn't be Kofi, but whatever the uncle's name was, they would have that as one of their names to recognize that that is who this is returning to us, and they have this purpose, and this is what they're going to contribute. We had naming ceremonies. We had our village priests would identify the child's purpose, and that child would be named partially based on that purpose as well. So every time they heard their name, they're reminded of what their purpose is for coming back to our village. And not only that, people who knew their name also knew what that child's purpose was. And so if that child was very fiery or inquisitive, like you're saying your daughter is, Rich, then they're like, well, no, that's in her disposition. We call it zodiac signs now, but we had African personalities that understood that, oh no, that's Oya. That child is a child of Oya. That was her Ori. If you're in Nigeria, she's a child of Oya. Who is Oya? Oya is Storm and X-Men. She controlled the lightning, what I mean? And so she's going to be a lightning child. We understood that. And that's a resource that's been taken away from us. Again, we call it zodiac signs, and we think those things are fixed. And if you're flexing like a Gemini and a Capricorn and a Sagittarius, you might get diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, because you multiple personality in here, out here, but our African spiritual systems, when we're going through our trainings, we had our disposition, like I'm born as a Capricorn, but according to our spiritual traditions, I'm supposed to master all the other zodiac manifestations, because different situations require different dispositions or different personalities. If I'm always fiery and quick to jump bad, if I'm in a place where I need to be peaceful to live, I won't be able to do that. So I'm dead. But I need to be able to flip, become receptive, even become stubborn as an earth sign sometimes in order to endure and get through successfully. So again, it's about that parent orientation. Who are we? What are we? Why are we? How are we? When are we? Where are we? If we don't have the proper answers to those, just like when we orient the clinical patient, about times 3, if you can't tell me who you are, you can't tell me where you are, if you can't tell me when you are, there's some serious psychological problems happening there. Right. And if we really step back, how many of us can honestly really answer those 3 questions for real?
Wow.
As always, Jeff coming with the heat. In the interest of time, I know we are a little bit over, so I want to kind of do a wrap up here. If anyone has any questions, please drop them in the chat. But from here, I'll let each of our panelists kind of leave you with a last thought here. And I'm going to start with you, Lauren.
I did not know what I should have a last thought, but I will give you one. I just appreciated this chance to talk about again the huge role that parents play in their child's life. I mean, it's not just bringing a child into the world, but there's so many aspects of influence that parents can have negatively and positively. And I think that's so inspiring to know just scientifically that just, believing that your kid, as Dr. Menzies was talking about, has purpose and treating them as such and guiding them as such and treating them like that in other realms, like in school, and being an advocate for them is such a big important part of a child's development. And I'm excited to be able to talk about that. So thanks.
Thank you for joining us on the panel. Dr. Berlu, you're up next.
Yes, I think Lauren stated it well, that we initially were going to focus on parenting and school performance, but I think it became more and more clear as we were talking that parenting affects an array of outcomes for children, not school performance. And school performance might be a reflection of some of the other outcomes that kids are having. And so I think our discussion about don't ignore parents when kids are having problems is an important one. And I think certainly Dr. Jeff's comments on having an Afrocentric approach to raising your child is great advice.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berlu. And Dr. Jeff.
Right. Yeah. Just in conclusion, what I was thinking about as you were speaking, Dr. Berlu, is that it came to mind that school is a pressure test for our parenting, right? And so it's one of those environments that shows us how we have taught our children to navigate the world, right? Because they're subjected to somebody else's rules, somebody else's judgment of once their academic aptitude, their ability, as well as their personality and their character. And so oftentimes it's hostile for our children. And so to me, it's like a pressure test. It's like a barometer. It lets us know how we have prepared our children to go out into this world, depending on what type of school it is, right? But then also I just wanted to shout out our ancestor, Dr. Asa Hilliard, who was very much an educational psychologist, and he did tremendous work on incorporating African-centered principles and perspectives into education. Well, I actually inherited a lot of like manuscripts and stuff like, I don't know if y'all know Dr. Carol Brunson Day, but she's the former president of the National Child Development Institute, National Black Child Development Institute. And so she was running with Dr. Hilliard back in California, way back in the day. So I've got a lot of her notes and the papers and stuff they used to pass out to each other. And when I started looking deeper into Dr. Hilliard's work, I found that like this brother was so prolific. He wrote for the mainstream journals as well as African-centered literature. And it was just so profound to me how many mainstream articles he had and how he was able to take this African-centered orientation and infuse the literature, with our brand of understanding and ways of being. So I just want to end with just shouting out Dr. Hilliard. And if any of y'all are looking for any further insights, I strongly recommend looking up Dr. Asa, A-S-A, Hilliard, H-I-L-L-I-A-R-D. And, just as parents, as adults, constant and consistent self-refinement is the way to go. Just constantly try to do something better today than you did yesterday. That's my personal model. I'm trying to be better me today than I was yesterday and tomorrow than I was today. I'm my own competition in that way. And I understand we need refinement. So that's it. But thank you all for this opportunity. I'll always enjoy hanging with my Cincinnati AB Psi family.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And I want to thank everybody for attending. Once again, I'm Dr. Rich Hall, the president of the Cincinnati chapter of the Association of Black Psychologists. I want you guys, this is the last of a 3-part series that we've been doing for the Center for Closing the Health Gap. Center for Closing the Health Gap. I always kind of run those words together. And it's been a pleasure for us to do that. And so we are definitely looking forward to future collaborations. We will be back with more of these at some point in the future. Be on the lookout for us at our website, Cincinnati Association of Black Psychologists, cincinnatiabpsi.com. We've dropped our email and our contact information into the chat as well if you're looking to connect with us outside of this. One of the last thoughts that I want to leave you with is one of the things that I often tell parents is, once again, having that curiosity about your child and recognizing that parenting is not about policing their behavior in the present, but you're trying to build a person for the future that will definitely outlast you, ideally. And so in thinking in those terms, you are thinking not just who they are now, but who they will be, and not just who you are, but who you have been. And so that's similar to what Jeff was saying, this connection between your past and future, your past and your present, and their future. And in being curious about that and being self-reflective, you are able to truly learn and value this time you have with this gift you've been given in the form of your children. So once again, I want to thank everyone for your time this evening, for joining us. And I hope everyone has a good holiday season as we get into that part of the year. And once again, want to say what a pleasure it's been to share some time with all of you today, as well as with my Cincinnati ABSI people. So thank you very much for your time and your energy and your questions and comments tonight. And please be in contact with us if you have any future questions, comments, or concerns. All right, everyone have a wonderful evening.